Let's move on to the July 12th City Council meeting. What a wonderful day that was, wasn't it? First started out, I thought I would have some people here that want to talk about this, but who is Louis Brathwaite? And what is the process for naming Santa Clarita streets? Now, when they talked about him, and I heard them discuss him, I decided to go research him. And this is his picture. And the recommended action was to direct an agreement with a developer to name a public street within the Sand Canyon Plaza mixed-use development as a street in his honor. And the background information came from July 11th, 2022 council meeting, where the city directed that an item be brought forward to discuss options to honor and recognize the late planning commissioner, who passed away on November 13th, 2001. Interesting. So when we talk about him, he was a long-term community leader, and he died from a heart attack. He was an elected member of the William S. Hart High School District Governing Board.
He was not elected.
Huh?
He was not elected.
It says here he was. Hold on.
I've looked at the election records. He never ran.
Was involved in the 1987 drive to create the city of Santa Clarita, and went on to being appointed as a planning commissioner. He made a big impression on Carl Boyer. I really always appreciated Carl. There were two of the old-timers that I really, really liked, and one was Carl, and the other one was Clyde Smythe. Not Cameron, Clyde. He was born in 1933 in New York, served in the U.S. Air Force, retired in 1990 after 38 years of service. He was a member of the Naval Air Reserve and loved to make furniture. He moved to Santa Clarita Valley in 1969 and evidently started to work with the powers to be. He moved here about 5 years after I did, and I have to admit that I didn't really pay much attention to the city until around 2000, when they decided to invade my neighborhood with the oversized vehicle parking ordinance. Here's from Clyde Smythe saying that he had integrity and courage. He was a superintendent of, Clyde was the superintendent of Hart High. He was on the board when we went through some very hard times financially. Clyde, I guess, said glowing things about him and enlisted support from the community and find ways to solve problems. He was open, listened, a strong representative, particularly in the Saugus area, but of course during that time there was only the Saugus area. You know that when I moved out here in Whites and Soledad, I was in Saugus. My postal zone was 91350. Well, that was mainly because there were only two postal zones out here, Newhall and Saugus, right? So he also worked together on the board of the SCV Boys and Girls Club, which I think has done a really phenomenal job. Boyer recalled that when Brathwaite was asked to run for school board, he went to talk to Ruth Newhall, who at the time was the editor of the Signal, and they discussed his candidacy. Ruth thought it was interesting that he would be represented as the first black candidate for political office in the Santa Clarita Valley, and he said he would rather not be categorized that way, which I think says a lot about him. You want to be categorized for your accomplishments and nothing else. Newhall complied with his wishes, and it says here that he went on to win the election. Are you saying he didn't win an election?
The record reflects that he was never elected, and that it's assumed by the Hart District, whose records are shaky, that he was appointed.
Okay.
He did not run for the election.
Okay. A week before his death, and they talked about this at the city council meeting, about some documents that he had written, some books that he had written, And it said a week before his death, he completed his autobiography, A Black Man's Job in a White Man's World. And it was chronicling his accomplished career with the federal government. And evidently, they're trying to get that reprinted. His family is. I don't know if any of those have survived. I know you asked if it could go in the library, and we'll see what happens. So,
Well, Gloria Locke has a copy. She sold it right to the chest.
okay. So I never met Lewis. I really didn't. After reading about his accomplishments, I knew that there were people who I thought of very highly who thought very highly of him. Like I said, Carl Boyer was a very honest guy, and Clyde Smythe, who, by the way, was the main reason why we have Central Park, was someone I really appreciated. Clyde taught me a really interesting. He really taught me something really interesting in his attempt to get a proposition passed to fund the building of the first phase of Central Park. And what he did was, he knew that there were different factions in the city. Some guys wanted all softball diamonds, some guys wanted all tennis courts, some guys wanted all soccer fields. And so what he did was he tried to put as many part of as many of those things into the plan as possible, and he would get together with all of the different groups that were working those particular things. And so therefore, every time that the Central Park, the initial construction of Central Park got brought up, he could call on all of the different factions of athletics here in Santa Cruz, and they would be out there to support him. He was a very good consensus builder, and at the time I was the chair of the Santa Cruz Adult Softball Committee, and so I was called all the time. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't have a problem. I think that I can support Lewis and other individuals who have great accomplishments. Name a street after them. I firmly appreciate naming a street after people that have passed on rather than our current council members, which seem to happen all the time. But I have a question about this timing of this. It's 21 years later. I mean, I heard Lorraine West talk all about how much she liked the guy and appreciated him and all that stuff. Why do you wait 21 years? Does this timing seem a little suspicious to you? And is there a process in place to name city streets? If you and I decided that we know somebody that has been neglected, how would we get this done? It's the same kind of question we're talking about with the Board of Supervisors. Why do they get privileges that the rest of us don't have? And so have we overlooked some other individuals that could have a street named after them? And we'll have to wait and see. So stand by. I'm going to be asking those questions, and then we'll find out exactly what I can find out. Yes, sir.
Answering your first question, you want to talk to the mic?
Yes, because otherwise I have a terrible time after this is over.
Okay, this came out of the fact when the city was asked to rename that short street for Sherry Fleming. And then it got into the head of Gloria Locke, who's a member of the Human Relations Roundtable. So this proposal came out of the Human Relations Roundtable. And this was a pet project of theirs, that they had got named a street after Sherry Fleming. Why couldn't they name a street after Louis Brathwaite? So the proposal came out of the Human Relations Roundtable, and this is their first big, win, other than getting rid of the hard Indian.
Well, I think that was pretty obvious where it came from. Now let's find out more about how, if there is somebody that we believe deserves that kind of honor, how we can make that happen. And also, we need to continue on our quest to get the Human Relations Roundtable out in public with the rest of the world.
Well, if you remember, there was a proposal. All this came up years ago when Lori Edner proposed naming fallen warrior bridge after a police officer who died in an off-duty motorcycle accident at McPhee. And there was a big kerfluffle about, you know what, are we really going to name this multi-million-dollar bridge off after a guy that died in an unfortunate motorcycle accident?
Well, you're talking about the gentleman who went off the end of the freeway in the earthquake.
Right, but at that time there was a proposal for the city to put together a policy for how do you name things.
We're going to ask that question because you know what? After a few years goes by, I mean, we get there's so much passion discussion about what to name a street, and then after a few years goes by, no one knows about it anymore, and no one cares about it anymore. This is not something that is going to drive years of controversy. So why can't we have a chat about it? Why can't we have a say in it? And we'll be asking. But now that you mentioned the discussion about the Human Relations Roundtable, I have a meeting set up with Bill Miranda for the 26th, and we're going to see exactly what he has to say. Okay, that was agenda item 2. 2.
Did anyone attend the meeting with Bill Miranda?
Huh?
Can anyone attend the meeting, or is it just you two?
I doubt it. It's not an open type of meeting. I asked him for some private time. If you want me to try to establish a town hall with him, I'm going to try to get him right here because he's a candidate for city council, and then you can ask him anything you want. Right? All right. That was agenda item 2. Let's move on to agenda item number 10. I tell you what. Second reading of an ordinance to update the city's Unified Development Code. How many times have we heard Lorraine West or Marcia McLean complain about the loss of local control? Oh my God, they're taking local control away from me. And now, when I started reading that ordinance, they're taking local control away from themselves. And maybe not in the best interest of Santa Clarita. So let's look at it a little bit. So supposedly, and you know what, this is the spin, proposed amendments relate to design standards, land use, procedures, and consistency with other documents, and are designed to provide enhanced clarity and accessibility to code. And if you believe that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. So right in the staff report, it says what they want to do is establish fuel-efficient and bicycle parking standards. I tell you what, my vehicle is super efficient when it's parked. It doesn't burn any gas. Right? So what's a fuel-efficient parking standard? The proposed language in the bill defers requirements to the California Green Building Code. So they took out all the requirements that they had, and they said, well, you just have to use this California Green Building Code. Now, I looked it up. Well, what a surprise when I found out what it said. It's amazing. The city seems yet to recognize that the majority of developments right here in our city are underparked. All you have to do to understand that position is drive down Valle de Oro from Dockweiler to Newhall Avenue in the evening. And I defy you to see a curb. Or go up Isabella Parkway about the same time. There isn't enough parking in virtually any development that's been built in the city. And the only place that I know where they had enough parking was in Spence's facility, where he lives in a condo area where each condo gets a two-space parking in their garage, one outdoor space dedicated to them, and then have visitor parking as well. And so it's and he's the only person that lives there, right? It seems like that they want to ignore this constantly, so I'm going to show you how they've done it. Then the proposal is going to add a diagram from the current director's policy to clarify the existing code's language regarding retaining walls in residential front yard setback areas. Really? I mean, that I can tell that's a very important issue. Because most of the new homes being built today don't have a front yard. True? So the city just wants to make what you have in your existing property less usable. So they'll come out with some now in my area, there are I didn't do this. I left my front yard sloped down. Across the street, the next two houses down, they put up retaining walls and made their front yards flat. So we'll have to see whether or not that complies with this new ordinance. Because according to the staff report, and according to the way the city gives you a little double talk, the proposal will not endanger or otherwise constitute a hazard to the public, health, convenience, interest, safety, or general welfare. I don't know how they can say that with a straight face when they look at all of our different areas and that have no parking. And I don't know what to say. Okay. So the design, location, and shape of the operating characteristics have to be suitable for the proposed use. You know what? If I have a one-bedroom apartment, there probably would be some married couples that live there. You probably need 2 parking spaces. If I have a 2-bedroom apartment, probably need another one. If I have a 3-bedroom apartment, probably need another one. Because if you have 2 or 3 kids, they're going to grow up, and before they leave home, they're going to have cars. Where are they going to park them? And then they want to tell us, Rick, you like this part? The streets provide access to these sites are of sufficient width and improved as necessary to carry the kind and quality of traffic such a proposal would generate. So if we look at Vista Canyon Ranch, is the infrastructure around it going to support the traffic that it's going to generate? The infrastructure can't support the traffic now. Okay, now this is the part that really upsets me. The proposed amendments would apply to properties throughout the city. And my question is, applicable to existing properties or new construction? Because the city came into my area in 2007, around that area, with something that they called the Extreme Neighborhood Makeover. You might have heard of that. And so the idea was that they were going to apply all of their codes to my existing neighborhood. Well, my existing neighborhood at the time was 40 years old. And now they want to tell me that because they wrote a code in 2005 that changed something in my neighborhood, they want all the properties to just miraculously change? It doesn't work that way. So we started, originally, we had Dave Peterson that was working with us. And I said, Dave, when you go out and you look at this stuff, are you going to apply the code that says that the property from the edge of your driveway to the edge of your property line, which in all of these homes was 5 feet, had to be planted? And he asked me, he said, well, why are you asking that? I said, well, because I just did an unofficial survey, and 85% of them are hardscaped. He said, well, maybe we shouldn't do that. Okay. Then came, they sent the community officer down, and the very first house he looked at was on the corner of Walnut Springs and Earbrook. You know who lived there? Me. So he decided to look in my backyard, and he said, oh, your shed is too big. And it was over the size of the code. The code said that it could be 100 square feet, and it was 120 square feet. So I talked to these guys. I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do open shed surgery, and I'm going to cut it down to 10 by 10. But I want to ask you a question. Are you going to enforce setbacks that the code requires that these to be 5 feet off the property line? And he said, well, what do you know that I don't? I said, come on out and I'll show you. So he came out to my house and he said, okay, let's drive around. You can show me. I said, we don't need to drive around. Let's just walk out in the front yard and let's look around the neighborhood. And he said, oh, that's not good. He said, if you reduce the size of your shed, we'll ignore the rest. I said, that's okay. So now I'm wondering, is this another area where they're going to say, oh yeah, we wrote this code, so now you can't do this, and you have to retrofit your property? You know that in my neighborhood, every single home, had some kind of an air conditioner on the roof when it was built. Okay? Most of them were swamp coolers. Today, if you want to take off your swamp cooler and put an air conditioner on, they won't let you. Against the code. So, and they say, well, the code says you can't have an air conditioner on the roof. Well, hey, we had it, and I'm going to show you where they you'll see it here in a minute. It's crazy. So they want to maintain the distinctive community character. So if my area had air conditioners all over the roofs, why can't they still have air conditioners all over the roofs? I don't care. So it's not the character of villages and neighborhoods. It is what the planners want when they write the codes. And they got in a lot of trouble. They went through my area. They were getting tons of pushback. And you know what? They did some good stuff. They found some properties that were really dilapidated, and they went after those. I have no problem with that. But they became a lot of pushback. So then they started over off of Seco in the Benelli tract. And they started in telling people their driveways were too wide, and they had to shave them down. And finally, there was a meeting at a particular house, and it just happened that the home was owned by a teacher who also taught with Tim Ben's wife. And so they invited Tim Ben. Tim Ben invited me. We went over there, and they said, what are we going to do? We got to stop this. We're going to sue them. We said, don't do that. That's your last resort, because once you sue them, they won't talk to you. So go and put pressure on them. So they went and they put pressure on them, and they killed it. So all of a sudden, they walked away. But now you're going to see that the new code actually allows it. So it's going to be funny. It's hilarious. But anyway, I don't think that this maintains a distinctive community character. I think it destroys the community character. But we'll see what happens. So here's the actual table from the dreaded green building code. It said if you build family duplexes, you have to have 2 parking spaces for each dwelling within a garage, accessed by a minimum 16-foot wide paved parkway. Now before, they used to have in their code, they had the width of the driveway. And I asked them that before. I said, is that a minimum width? Is that a maximum width? He said, no, that's an exact width. Really? Well, now it's a minimum width. And the garage shall be a minimum of 20 feet inside, so a 20-foot setback is the garage. My house has a 20-foot setback as a garage. But I'm going to show you all the new homes. They don't have anything like that. And then, of course, you can actually have a wider garage door than they want. Whoopee, whoopee. But if you're in a mobile home park and they're going to build a new one, you only get 1.5 spaces per mobile home park. I don't know where you park the other half a car. Maybe it's because it's a car and a motorcycle. I don't know. But you only get 1 parking space because the other half is somewhere else, conveniently located. Whoops, I did it again. Huh? Well, I don't know.
Is that going to apply to existing mobile home parks, or?
That's exactly what I asked. Is these new codes, are they new for new construction, or are they going to try to apply them for existing construction? I don't know. You know what? I don't trust them, because I've seen what they've done in the past. I would imagine This will be for maybe for new construction, and I'll show you why in a minute. All right, so if you have a multiple family dwelling, one space for each one bedroom dwelling, two spaces for each dwelling with more than one bedroom. So if you're husband and wife and you have two cars, you only get one parking space? And for a second residential unit, one space for each second residential unit. So now, if you build an ADU, the other law says you don't have to supply any parking. Now, this says you do. I don't know which one is the right one. So let's look at Vista Canyon Ranch. Vista Canyon Ranch is an example of what the city has permitted today. Now, you see that section in the middle that looks like a checkerboard? I'll blow it up for you a little. There it is. Those are 245 KB, maximum 1,400 square foot homes with no front yard, no backyard, and 5 foot on each side. You tell me how people are going to get out of there in the morning to go to work. And the sad part about it is people bought them. Now that's the future of Santa Clarita if we allow these guys to continue. Because what they did was the developer realized that if they are building a large development, they can define that development to be under a homeowners association, because the vote to form the homeowners association only includes the people that own the property. And since they own all the property, they get all the votes. And so they form the homeowners association, and that homeowners association by state law doesn't have to comply with any of the city setbacks. So what you see here is very narrow streets, one lane in each direction, and then alleys between all these places. This is not, I wouldn't want to live there. I don't know about you guys, but so who's driving this? Well, it's being driven by our council and the senior staff. They don't want to talk about it. They don't. We mentioned it to them. They just go away. They do not live in any of those developments. Actually, Lorraine lives in someplace even worse. She lives in a 1,000 square foot house on her 10 acres that's supposed to be, or that I thought was supposed to be, a historical a historical building. And now they're talking about building a road through it, so I don't know what happens to it. And Marshall lives in Happy Valley. Let's see, Smythe, Valencia, or part of Newhall. But they don't seem to be concerned because they're not going to live there. And every time they do this, then developers tend to contribute at a certain time of every 4 years. Traffic and parking continue to get worse. They are the biggest drivers. I ran for council in 2014. People were talking about how bad traffic was then. And traffic is worse now. And it's going to get worse in the future. It's terrible. And the roads are not keeping pace with development because the only time Santa Clarita builds roads is when they can get a developer to pay for it. So when you see that Cross Valley Connector that they all talk about it being, oh man, this is going to save the world, $90-some million was contributed to that road by Newhall Land and Farm. And then it only got built so they could develop the west end of the valley. So the only way to turn this around is for our community to push for change. It's the same as anything else that we do. We have got to be the ones that push the council to stop doing this. When you see stuff like this on the agenda from now on, you need to get up and tell them, we don't want that. It's not what we want.